The smell of recycled air and machine oil was something I stopped noticing about 8 months ago. That is what happens when you work maintenance on Varath Station long enough. The strangeness becomes ordinary. The three-eyed dock workers become just dock workers. The hum of 17 different translation frequencies, bleeding through the corridor walls, becomes white noise. You stop seeing the galaxy and start seeing the broken pipe in Section C that nobody filed a repair ticket for. My name is Marcus Hale. Everyone called me Mac. I was 31 years old, human, and employed by Varath Station's infrastructure division at a pay grade that made my mother genuinely sad when she asked about it on our weekly calls. My job was simple. When things broke, I fixed them. When things needed maintenance, I maintained them. I carried a tool belt that weighed more than some alien children, and I knew every corner of this station the way most people know their own apartments. I was nobody, and I was perfectly fine with that. It was a Tuesday, by Earth calendar, which meant nothing to anyone on Varath except me. I was crossing through the main transit corridor on docking ring 7, heading toward a reported atmospheric seal failure 3 sections over, when I heard the sound. Not a crash, not a shout, just a soft, strange thud, like something delicate hitting the floor. I looked up from my tablet. She had fallen in the exact center of the corridor, and in the 5 seconds since she had fallen, a circle had already formed around her. Not a circle of people rushing forward, a circle of people stopping, staring, and taking a precise half-step back. She was Vale. I knew that immediately. You could not miss it. The Vale were tall, nearly 8 feet, with pale luminescent skin that shifted color faintly depending on their mood, like the surface of a deep ocean catching distant light. They were considered, by most species in the Galactic Assembly, to be something between a diplomatic institution and a religious symbol. Nobody spoke badly about the Vale. Nobody even spoke casually about the Vale. They occupied a category in galactic culture that existed somewhere above respected and somewhere below worshipped. This one was lying on the cold floor of docking ring 7, and she could not get up. I could see it clearly. She was conscious. Her eyes were open, pale silver and wide, moving across the ceiling above her with visible effort. She was wearing an exoskeletal harness across her back and shoulders, a sleek piece of technology I recognized as a mobility support frame. It had gone completely dark. No lights, no hum, no function. Around her, no one moved. A Chorath businessman in a pressed gray coat stood 3 feet away, staring at her with an expression I could not fully read, but understood to mean he was calculating something. 2 Syneth diplomats were murmuring to each other rapidly in their own language, gesturing toward a communications panel on the wall rather than toward her. A Krell worker simply stood and watched with the flat, patient expression that Krell always wore, as though they were waiting for the situation to resolve itself through physics. There were 2 Vale attendants nearby. I noticed them because they were the ones who looked the most distressed. They stood about 15 feet from her, rigid, their luminescent skin gone a pale, ashamed gray. They were doing absolutely nothing. Station security had arrived at the edge of the crowd. One of them was speaking quietly into a communicator. I caught the phrase supervisory escalation protocol and understood immediately that nobody was coming to help anytime soon. I stood there for about 4 seconds. I want to be honest about those 4 seconds. I did think about the politics. I had worked on Varath long enough to understand, in a loose and incomplete way, that different species had different rules about contact and crisis. I knew the Vale were not ordinary. I knew touching her without permission might mean something I did not intend. But then I looked at her face again. She was scared. Whatever dignity her species carried, whatever ceremonial weight surrounded her name and her title, none of it was visible in that moment. What was visible was a person lying on a cold metal floor, alone in the middle of a crowd, and nobody was coming. I have been scared on a floor before. When I was 9 years old, I broke my arm falling from a tree in my backyard, and I lay there in the grass calling for my mother. She came running across the yard in her kitchen slippers, sliding on the wet grass, and she grabbed my good hand before she even looked at the arm. She said, "I've got you, baby. I've got you." I pushed through the crowd. People parted for me, mostly out of surprise, I think. A few made sounds I did not have translation for. Someone, I was fairly certain, said something in Galactic Common that translated roughly to, "He is going to cause an incident." I knelt down beside her, set my tool belt on the floor, and looked her in the eyes. "Hey," I said, "I've got you. Can you tell me what you need?" She stared at me. I think she was genuinely surprised that I was speaking to her directly, without ceremony or announcement. Her lips moved. The translation chip behind my ear worked for a moment, and then delivered her words in a clean, quiet voice. "My harness," she said. "The battery unit. It has failed. Where's the charging port?" "Between my shoulder blades. I cannot reach it." I looked at my tool belt. I had a universal power adapter on it. I carried it because half the equipment on this station was manufactured by 17 different companies across 9 different species, and none of them had ever agreed on a single connector standard. It was one of the most frustrating things about my job. It was also, apparently, the most important thing on my belt at this specific moment. "Can I reach behind you?" I asked. "I want to check the port." She held my gaze for a moment. "Yes," she said. "You may." I reached carefully behind her, found the port between the harness supports, and connected the adapter. The harness made a low sound, like a held breath releasing, and then it lit up along every edge in a warm blue-white glow. The frame hummed to life. Within 30 seconds she was rising, slowly, with the careful precision of someone who understood her own body well. She stood, all 8 feet of her, luminescent and composed. The corridor was completely silent. She looked down at me. I was still kneeling on the floor next to my tool belt, which I was in the process of snapping back together. I looked up at her. "Thank you," she said. "No problem," I said, because that is what I say when someone thanks me. I picked up my belt and stood. Then the security team reached me, and things got complicated. They did not arrest me. They were very careful to use the phrase, temporary administrative holding, which meant the same thing as arrest, but in a room with better lighting. I sat in a chair in a small station office, and I ate the protein bar from my jacket pocket, and I waited. The protein bar was stale. It had been stale when I packed it that morning. This bothered me more than anything else happening around me, which I recognized was a slightly strange set of priorities. But I had no control over the political situation, and I did have opinions about food quality. A station commander came in after about 20 minutes. His name was Orath, Syneth species, and he had the careful expression of someone who has been handed a problem they did not create and do not appreciate. He explained, with great patience, that I had made physical contact with a Veil Path speaker without ceremonial authorization. He explained that the Chorath delegation had already filed a formal diplomatic protest. He explained that the Veil attendants were in a very difficult position culturally. He explained that an appropriate gesture of formal apology, issued through the correct channels, might significantly reduce the administrative and political difficulty of my situation. I listened to all of this. I ate the last of my protein bar. Then I said, "I understand all of that, and I would do it again." Commander Orath looked at me the way people look at a machine that has just given an unexpected output. "I want to be clear," he said carefully. "That position may result in formal censure." "I understand," I said. "You are not concerned?" I thought about it honestly. "She was on the floor," I said. "Nobody was helping her. I had the things she needed on my belt. I don't know how to look at that situation and find the part where I did something wrong." He stared at me for a long moment. "You are," he said slowly, "a very simple creature." I considered being offended. I decided he probably meant it as an observation rather than an insult. "Yes," I said, "pretty much." He left the room. I sat alone for another 25 minutes. Then a different officer came in and told me that the path speaker had requested my presence. Not required, not summoned. Requested. The officer seemed to feel this was significant. I followed him. She was in a private transit lounge on the upper level. A quiet room with wide observation windows, looking out over the docking arms, and the slow, enormous movement of ships against the stars. She was seated, her harness glowing steadily, her hands folded in her lap. Her 2 attendants stood near the door and looked at me with expressions that had moved from a shamed gray to a complicated shade of something I could not name. She gestured to the chair across from her. I sat. For a moment, neither of us spoke. Outside the window, a massive cargo hauler was drifting into position at Dock 14. I watched it because I knew from the maintenance schedule that Dock 14 had a lateral alignment sensor that needed calibration, and I found myself wondering if the ship's pilot had noticed the slight drift. "You are thinking about something else," she said. I looked back at her. "Sorry. Dock 14 has a sensor issue. I've been waiting for a slow traffic period to fix it." She studied me. Her skin had shifted to a warmer color, not quite the silver white of formal presentation, something quieter. "I was conscious the entire time," she said. "On the floor, I heard everything." I did not say anything, because there was nothing useful to add. "I heard every species in that corridor make a choice," she said. "I heard the Chorath man calculate the legal implications of contact. I heard the Sineth diplomats discuss the communication protocols for notifying my office. I heard your station security initiate escalation procedures." She paused. "I heard my own attendants go silent." "That must have been a very long few minutes," I said. "It was." She looked at me with those pale silver eyes. "And then you came through the crowd, and you said—" She stopped. Her skin shifted again. "You said, 'I've got you,' before you knew who I was, before you knew anything." "I knew you were on the floor," I said. "Yes," she said. "That was enough for you." She was quiet for a moment. "The Veil have studied humanity for 40 years, she said. "We have debated your classification in every assembly we have held on the subject. You are physically capable of tremendous violence. You have survived conditions that would extinguish most species. You are emotionally chaotic by every standard of galactic measurement. We could not decide what you were." "What did you conclude?" I asked. "We concluded nothing," she said, "because we were asking the wrong question." She looked at me steadily. "Every species in that corridor today was sophisticated. Every species had access to information, to protocol, to the understanding that I was suffering. And every species calculated." Her voice was very quiet. "You did not calculate." I thought about that. "I calculated a little," I said honestly. "I had about 4 seconds of thinking about the politics. And then I thought about my mom running across the yard in her kitchen slippers," I said. She did not have the context for that. I explained it briefly. The broken arm, the grass, the slippers, the words. She listened without interrupting. When I finished, she was still for a long moment. "You helped me," she said, "because someone once helped you." "I helped you because you looked scared," I said. "The other reason is also true, but the first one is the one that got me off the wall." She looked at me for a long time. "You said I've got you," she said quietly. "Yes." "Do humans say that often?" I thought about it. "Yeah," I said. "Pretty often." She nodded slowly, and something in her expression settled, like a question she had been carrying for a very long time had just found its answer. I went back to work an hour later. My temporary administrative holding was resolved. The Chorath protest was withdrawn. Apparently, a Veil Path speaker outranks a Korath diplomat so thoroughly that the withdrawal process took less time than the original filing. I received a formal commendation in a language I could not read, which I framed and hung in my maintenance locker between a spare power coupling and a photograph of my mother. The corridor on Docking Ring 7 looked exactly the same as it always did. The crowds moved through it like water through a pipe, constant, purposeful, indifferent. Nobody looked at me differently. I was still the human maintenance tech with the heavy tool belt and the stale protein bar. I was still nobody. I was fixing an atmospheric vent in Section B when I heard footsteps behind me. I turned. One of Sale's attendants was passing through, the one whose skin had gone that complicated, unnameable color when she looked at me. She glanced at me as she passed. She gave a single, formal, deliberate nod. I nodded back. Then she was gone, and I went back to the vent. It took me about 12 minutes to fix. I logged it in the system, picked up my tools, and moved on to Dock 14. The alignment sensor wasn't going to calibrate itself.